Let's start with a word of prayer. Our Heavenly Father, thank you for this day and thank you for this opportunity to study and learn and understand and appreciate the resources that you give each and every one of us. And Lord, we pray that we can be good stewards of what you have given to us and that we are in tune with what you would have do with the resources you've given us and to discern what's the best way to invest and work with our money and the talents that you've given us. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Kingsbury and we'll get going.
Well, thank you, Bill, but I want to continue the thank yous. Bill Ried from Covenant Baptist Church that we collaborated with, and Gene Crossley has worked diligently behind the scenes to help with marketing and doing some of the logistics for coffees and make sure all that.
And keeping Mike and me on track, but frankly, she was the driving force behind it. And I'm
very good at that.
I fully mean that. I don't know that we would have got it done in time if it wasn't for Gene.
Because Gene had been pushing me for a couple months to do this, and this has been my ministry since 2008. I've done financial peace. We've used Willow Creek's resources, and I put some illustration of resources that have helped me develop the information that we're going to present today, and some of the resources that have helped for me. You're going to see one book that is dated. It's called Master Your Money from Ron Blue. It goes back to the 80s. That's a Christian financial planner that was really the impetus for Deb, my wife Deb, and myself as we have tried to balance our life with this definition of stewardship. And so we've had right here over 130 people go through financial peace. And we kind of stopped it, and was kind of glad that Gene kind of pushed me a little bit, and we got connected with Bill, and it's been a great experience to collaborate with our colleagues at Covenant and Ann Phelps, who I know from the Detroit Baptist Union Board. She's come from Wellspring, so thank you, Ann. And we tried to promote it. I tried to share it. I'm on the board with Ann. And so we're here today, but it's, an honor just to be able to help throughout the years. And I remember I'll share some experiences as we go through. And there's a couple of people here today that went through my first class that can attest to this.
It's so much better shape than we were before the first class.
Yeah, it's been a blessing to see the growth of people and some of the success stories that have been shared with people. But I just wanted to start with a real quick devotional. And this is going to be one of the themes of today. And you're going to see this scripture again throughout the presentation. It's from Proverbs 6, verses 6 through 8. Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways to be wise. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler. Yet it stores its provision in the summer and gather its food at harvest. Saving money. Osha goes on to say, by saving money, we can be prepared for what God to use to serve others in times of plenty and in times of need. If you haven't saved money in the past, start now by setting aside for emergencies. Your first goal should be a 1,000 emergency funds that will allow you to pay cash for unplanned expenses. Your savings goal should increase to 1 month saving living expenses, then 3, then 6 months of living expenses. Savings should be a way of life for you. And you can avoid hoarding by giving along the way. If your job is volatile, if you have health issues or major expense coming, you'll need more savings. Every time you save money, take a step back from the cliff. If you're living without margin, you're on a cliff's edge, and one gust of wind will push you over. A key to being successful at savings is to develop a spending plan, which helps you spend on purpose. You need to stop the spontaneous and needless spending, which consumes the money you should be saving. As you develop your plan, focus on cutting expenses, setting limits for spending faithfully, and live within those limits every month. Reducing excess consumption will help you create a financial margin, and as a result, you will have more money to save. That's what I'm going to talk about. And he, along with this gentleman, Larry Burkett, is the founders of Crown Financial Ministries. Now, Larry has passed away, and I've followed his resources more so today than Dave Ramsey. But you'll see this theme is going to be weaved throughout this. And I know that, honestly, look at the demographics. I think this is important, that these concepts that we take is something that you can share with your children and
grandchildren.
And grandchildren that instill, because one of the biggest comments that we got coming out of when we did financial peace was, I wish I would have learned that 20, 30 years ago. And I've been glad that I did learn those concepts 20, 30 years ago. And I've been able to apply those in my life. And of course, I'll get into some stories that our next speaker, Dr. Jim Kent, on the end of life strategies, and I'll put the plug in for, remember, it's Saturday, April 1st, and it will be at Covenant Baptist Church. But he and I'll share a little bit about my downside in life. We have a gambling addiction.
Yeah.
We've bet for 50 years on the University of Michigan, every University of Michigan football. And I'll share that the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say, towards the end of the presentation.
Yeah, that sounds really bad, and we know you.
So you're in bad shape because we're not going to be in the tournament this year.
I know. I've saved some money. I won't have to gamble with it.
Well,
All right, but anyway, so today, we've been talking about this theme of stewardship, and so today we're going to focus on the challenge of honoring God with our prayer. And so far, this series in Sensible Stewardship, we've learned how to protect our assets. We've learned how to take control of our assets by having a good end of financial plan, via trust, or make sure you have those personal legal documents in place. The last time we met, we learned how the economy affects our assets. It's a volatile economy. We'll get more into that as we go through the presentation. And some of the strategies of being efficient and taking advantage of some of the tax initiatives that we can avail ourselves to be generous in our giving. And so today, I just want to talk a little bit about being a steward of our assets. And, the definition of stewardship, according to Webster, is the office and duties and obligations of steward, the conducting of supervising or managing of something, and the careful responsibility of management of something entrusted to one's care.
Your screen is not moving. Can you do page down? Page
Oh,
down.
okay. I'll try that.
Excuse me.
Working before. Sorry.
story of technology.
Yeah.
It's always working when you test it.
All right, you might have to restart.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. You made it.
It's sort of, and this is in
Almost that part.
solid. So now, yeah, it's now you're back.
Yeah, but it's still not.
You go ahead and start your presentation. It is. It's following exactly what you have on the screen. There you go. And I think if you advance now.
Yes.
There you go.
Okay, thank you, Bill. All right, let's see now, we've talked about our sensible stewardship, what we've covered to date so far. Talked about the definition, and then from our perspective, our personal perspective, we have, you know, that three-legged stool concept: time, talent, and treasure. We've heard that throughout the years. So we all have the same amount of time, 24 hours in a day, 365, 366 days in a year. And we all have some unique gifts. Obviously, you know that I wasn't very technology, but that's not my gift. Maybe my gift is analyzing financial statements. But we all have different gifts. Some people are, you know, very good working with children.
And one thing about that, if you think about it, what do you really enjoy doing?
Yeah.
What you enjoy doing is probably a gift God gave you. And always used to tell my kids, find something you love to do, figure out a way to get paid for it, and you'll never work a day in your life. And there's some truth in that. Stuff you enjoy is probably a gift God gave you, and you should want to use it. It should give you great joy.
I remember when we did the spiritual gifts survey or whatever, and it gave us, somebody said, it gives you permission to say no to things that are more stressful. Like there's stuff that Jean's really good at. And I'm like, it's like, Jean's really good at that, ask her.
Let her do it. Yeah.
But stuff that I like to do, she, you know, she doesn't like to do, but it gives us permission.
For example, we asked Esther to sing in the praise team. No one has ever asked me to sing in the praise team.
Me neither.
Esther, are you permanently up there now?
God purposely,
am.
God purposely gave us different gifts, right?
Yes.
Because we all had the same gifts. How boring would that
We'd
be?
never get anything done.
True. You know, I took it twice when I was at Willow Creek. And within 7 years, only one of my top three changed. But turns out I've been working my whole life in my top gift, which is administration.
Yep, I can see that.
And also helps in hospitality, because I was in the wedding industry many years. So, and I knew that before I even took it. I was just listening to some of the sermons, and yeah, that sounds like me. And I just now, I'm proofreading this thing, and I shouldn't be, but that's the first thing. And I start doing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you and
You are who you are.
Can't not do that.
And one of the things about true stewardship, it's that three-legged stool concept: your time, your talent, and your treasure. If you remove one of those legs, it's going to be very difficult to sit on that stool.
And part of stewardship is if you think of the one leg, right, your treasure, your money, when you invest in something, look at what you're investing in. Even if you're giving money to a certain charity, how are they spending that money? You should understand that, and don't just give money to it. And the same for your own church. When you give money to your church and your tithe, get involved on the time and the talent side of things, because God needs that as much as He needs your treasure. And if you get involved in the time and talent side, He does need your money too, because money just doesn't grow on trees for the church either. So it truly is a three-legged stool.
So today I want to just take one aspect of that stewardship, talk about our treasure. So there's a lot of different things. Obviously, we got money. Some people aspire for a big home. Read about these in the paper about these multi-gazillion dollar homes. Some people look for cars, things, material things, and so there's a lot of things that we kind of look for from our treasures. But are we looking at it from God's point of view and what the Bible will talk to us about? So one way of measure how we're doing financially is look at the stock market. And so you can see that, last year, depending upon where you invested, and Randy talked about that the last time we met a little bit, but the volatility in 2022, the S&P was down 19.4% in 20, and the NASDAQ down 33%. So talking about the different asset classes, and that's why it's important to have a well-diversified portfolio. But year to date, this year, as of last Friday, let's forget about this week.
Yes.
But as of last Friday, when I was getting ready for this, the NASDAQ has been already back to 11.7%. And if you look at the longevity, and the bottom looks at through the recessions that we've had, those gray bars, they really come out real crisp. But the gray bars are tied to period of recessions. But just look at the line on the top, and you can see in 2010 when we had that mild recession, look how the market went back, but immediately came back. So I have a long-term perspective. And one of the things that our culture is ingrained in us is to spend money. And, it's kind of like newscasters and everybody will say, well, if you spend money, that'll help fuel the economy. But unfortunately, it doesn't allow us to save. My career has been in the automobile industry for 40 years prior to my retirement. Half of it was in the manufacturing side in the controller's office. The last half of the career was at financial services in the controller's office. And being in financial services, we want to be able to understand how people are they creditworthy to loan money on cars. But if you take a look at one of the things that this consumer debt loans, just go back to 2008, the debacle of the housing industry in 2008, and the markets were in big turmoil. People didn't spend as much. And but look at the consumer debt, and there's an interesting article just recently, about 2 weeks ago, an article in the Sunday paper, study your option as credit card debt stores. And one of the things that when I first did this financial piece was we had young couples that were worried about their jobs, obviously back then. And we had 20 couples, and excluding car debt, student debt, mortgages. The question I did a survey since there was enough people to, keep it anonymous. And the credit card debt was $18,000.
That was the average.
That was the average. And then on top of that, you have the automobile cars, maybe 2 cars at the time, your mortgage, and individuals carrying student loans. So our debt has continued to accelerate. And look at this is an interesting graph. And there's some school of thought that we are actually negative savings because of the fact that you see this precipitous increase in consumer debt. But think about our savings rate when people weren't allowed to spend money during COVID. We now started to save money. But our culture says spend. Why do you think companies spend zillions of dollars or millions of dollars? What is it? Something like $8 million for a 30-second commercial on the Super Bowl. Somebody has evaluated that analysis that's worth spending their money because of the return that they'll get. And then, of course, today, in our environment, especially last year, we saw that consumer price index. You can see that, since 2010, we had pretty much low inflation, was averaging 1.7. And I think if you're a student of the economy, the Fed wants to keep it under 2%. Well, when inflation got out of control, we start seeing this 9% year over year. Right now, let's see, as of 1/23, January 23, the date of this graph, the best data from was 6.6%, which then moved over to this precipitous rate increase in crime. So now that not only have we seen cost more when you go to the grocery store, you can see the gas prices, remember, Kroger's got that plan where, you get points and, you can spend $1 and a couple times, before 2022 and 2021. I was getting 89 cents a gallon because it was only $1.89. And now it's $3.49 and it was approaching middle of last year at here in our markets, very close to $4.
Yeah. I know 20 cents this week.
Yeah.
We get our gas at Sam's, and so it was 304. It was 324 a week later, and their price is usually way under.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the lines.
Just this year, we've seen interest rates, the prime rate increase for 3.5% from 3.25% to 7.5%. And last month, they increased it another 25 basis points to 7.75%. And if you've been following this week's two things that drove the market was, inflation is still rampant, so we might see another 50, and even some people might think another 75 basis points. But that all then ties to lease credit card. And I'll tell you, if I had a second life, I want to start a credit card company.
Yeah, that's
when you look at those rates at 22%, we're going to get a 22% return now. And that's one of the things I shared with our children as they were growing up. I said, kids, you need to not get caught up in the culture and save and, diligent about it, perhaps, and start saving for it. And my iPad story, when I first did financial peace, I thought, boy, these iPads are kind of cool. And of course, Mike said, go out and buy it. And I said, no, I'm not going to challenge myself. And, I'd go out to lunch maybe 3-4 times a week with colleagues at work. And I said, I'm not going to go out to lunch except on Fridays. And I said, I'm going to put $5 in the envelope every day.
But $5.
Yeah, so $20. And this was in January when we started. And I challenged the class that I was going to do this. And I got through August, and I had just under 90% of the way. And Deb says, go out and buy it for my birthday. Buy your birthday presidential state. And yet, I could have done it, but it didn't cost me any out-of-pocket money by just saving along. But there are people that went through financial peace that said that when they started saving for it, they found out they really didn't need it. Or they found some alternative that met the need. And so, because it gave them time to reflect and think about it.
Those credit cards, I follow Mike's advice. We pay them off every month.
Mm-hmm.
We use them more to see where do we spend our money.
Yeah, it's a good way to keep track
of it.
If
I spend cash, I don't remember what I spent it on.
No.
But part of that, 22% interest is what I found is when I wasn't paying finance charges, they were like giving me, please 0% until March, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
they want you to balloon it up.
Yeah.
So you can't pay it off, and now you're forced to pay some finance. They make money. And part of those high interest rates is to cover bad debt as well, because there's some people that won't be able to cover their debt and will default on or go bankrupt. And that's, that's not good either, but that's what some of those high interest rates are going to pay.
And now they give you free stuff
Yeah.
when you charge stuff. And I mean, we go out to lunch all the time with our cards.
And when Dave was in med school, they were offering, they buy you these $100 textbooks if you sign up for the, I mean, they get the kids in college.
Yeah, they definitely want you to get indebted to them.
Well,
They want to start the
and
interest counter going.
when you talk about college kids, one of the best things we did, and Dave was always pretty good with his money, our oldest one, he's 42, and then Dan stayed home, so we had more when he went to college. And when Drew went to college, Chase came out with it was like a kid's credit card. And it was great because it was tied to our account. It wasn't tied to our account to pay for it. It was tied to our account where we could see every pop that he got out of the machine or what, I mean, literally go to McDonald's and they used their credit card, their card for everything.
Yeah.
But the thing of it was, he knew we could see everything. So he only charged what he needed. You know what I mean? He didn't. And I thought that was the best. You hear about college kids just charging up, they have hundreds of thousands, not hundreds, but thousands of dollars of debt before they even realize that, oh, I might have to pay that.
Well, it might be hundreds of thousands if you include student loans.
Well, yeah.
I mean, it's really a little bit scary what
it's a lot scary, let me tell you.
happens to some of the kids.
Well, if you don't teach financial management, some of you know I worked at a private school for a number of years. There were kids who went to college, they had no clue how anything, checkbooks or anything worked.
Mm-hmm.
Brilliant minds, 4 all this stuff, and it's just basic. And if you don't teach it, and if you don't learn it, if you don't learn good stewardship at church and partnering with God, and it's unfortunate.
Well, and even teaching your young kids is important. I remember my son, his favorite line was, well, just put it on the credit card, because he knew what cash could buy, but he didn't really understand the credit card.
Yes. Mom just buy it.
Don't leave home without it.
Yeah. Kids understand the
American
value
Express.
of cash, but they don't understand what the, and
Just limited
right.
Club Med, right?
Right. Yeah.
Well, when our three boys were young, we had this thing, and I mean, young. And they get birthday money from my mom, lives in Pennsylvania and everything. And so we had the needs and the wants. So they understood that mom and dad paid for everything that they needed, school stuff and all that kind of stuff. And then they had to save up their birthday money or Christmas money, or they had to do something to earn some money to get the wants. And then somebody has a sermon about how important fellowship was a need. And you think Dan was never paying attention, Mr. ADHD, and he negotiated. Pastor said it was a need. And I'm like, you don't think you ever pay attention to the service? So they were going on, the youth group was going on an expensive, whatever, some kind of game thing. And they gave him several weeks to save up for it and everything. So he negotiated. We paid, normally he would have paid for something like that. We paid half of it because he negotiated that pastor's sermon said that fellowship was.
Well, it was worth it that he was listening.
Indeed, yeah.
To your point,
but that did great. He found out they didn't need a lot of the stuff that they wanted when mom and dad were the cash cow and when they had to save.
And that kind of leads us into factors that, ability to manage our savings. Obviously, we talked a lot of that, last year, declining 401ks or RRAs. The lack of discipline, for the most part, of people not to save. And one of my last assignments before I retired was I was responsible for the $400 million operating budget at Mercedes-Benz Financial Services. And the last business plan that we went through, we had to increase the benefit accrual for the profit centers, and they were confused. And so one of the things I went through is, each one of our components. Healthcare, obviously, we know the precipitous increase of healthcare, and even though we were paying a notional amount, then that gap still continued to rise. But I said, folks, if everybody participated in the 401k and took advantage of the match, at that time we'd have a $3 million profit to our bottom line. And we went, the next graph that I showed was the distribution of people, the number of people in the 50s and 55 and greater that had not participated in the 401k. It's just, it was crazy. And it was, we didn't have the best match, but ours was above average, just slightly above average. But, here's this money that you're leaving on the table. And it's just so unfortunate. But, one of the things that also plays into the factors over the last century, we've obviously continued to transform. When I went into the automobile industry or out of college, was the fact that, I went and started working for American Motors, and, entry level job, I was kind of a gopher and went down to the Jeep plant, and they told me they called the controller and made arrangements for me to tour the plant. And, back in the mid 70s, it was always very labor intensive. The people would bring out the welding guns to, do all the quarter panels and the assemblies coming out. And now today, just last about a month ago, isn't that one? Jean and her husband went with Deb and I to the Rouge factory tour. And, the automation, all the computers, and I was talking to Terry about all the programming that you have to do, but, all the computer robots who are doing all the assembly work. So, it puts a challenge on what the availability of jobs here are in America. And so we've been transformed. And of course, we've seen, if you follow the news, even General Motors is forcing these buyouts, not calling it layoffs, but, I got to believe that if they don't meet their targets, round 2 or phase plan B will come into effect. And earlier this year, the Amazons and the Microsofts all announced, tens of thousands of people that they were going to be eliminated. And then throughout years, we've seen a lot of other major impact, the Great Depression. And, look at that time, our transformation of generations probably lost the impact of what they went through, but most likely our grandparents went through that time, and perhaps even some of your parents went through that time. And then the gas lines in the 70s. Remember that? There was no gas, and the lines. And even we saw that to a certain extent to COVID, that we saw some gas.
And gas was expensive. It was like almost 35 cents a gallon.
Yeah.
I remember that.
1974.
73, I think, was the embargo.
We had rationing in Pennsylvania every other day.
And then high interest rates in the 1980s.
Yeah, when we were buying our first home.
And I remember, we had one of those variable mortgages, had to go refinance, and 13 and plus percent.
Our first mortgage, the going rate was 17%.
Oh my gosh.
We were glad to get a blend rate because we couldn't afford to assume the mortgage. We got one at 14% in the middle.
You know what? And it's so hard. Andrew and I have talked a lot about that. And I mean, he refinanced a much bigger house than we had. Our generation, I had a 9.5 VA loan back then. And he's like, how could you have a mortgage rate? And I should tell him about your 17%.
Yeah, it was in 1981 when we bought our first house in Medford. It was
79 at 11%.
Yeah.
And I mean, our
And
generation,
kids
no wonder
can't
why they're,
imagine that high. Our kid, you know, we talk to our kids about
Yeah.
things they can't imagine.
no wonder why people our age are in such bad shape because of just paying
Of
for.
course, it's kind of an inverse relationship. House prices were low because nobody could afford them, right?
Mhm.
When rates get so low, then the price of homes gets astronomical sometimes, because people extend themselves to the amount that their paychecks will let them.
Oh, when I first bought my house and I worked for OL Anderson, everybody's like, why are you buying in Redford? Why are you buying there? You have to think your income's going to get bigger over the years. And I said, I'm buying a house where I can afford to buy a house.
Being smart.
And people thought that you always buy a house more than assuming your income's going to go up.
Yeah, we did the same thing in New Jersey. And the realtors saw 2 Bell Laboratories salaries. We said, no, we're buying on one, and most of them wouldn't listen to us. So
Yeah.
we do plan on having kids, and there's going to be one salary when that happens. And we had one realtor that finally listened to us, and that's how
We
bought
did
our
the
home.
same thing, husband and I both working, but we bought our house on one salary. And we don't have children, but with the idea that, and over the course of our married life, one or the other of us was out of work, it's not, so, and they looked at us and thought, well, you can, they want to show you.
Yeah,
Like, that's nice, we don't need it.
they want
At
their
least we have more
6
homes
or
than we need.
3%, and then they're on the way.
Good point, Bill.
Even today's credit standards.
Not all of them.
I think most of us can relate that when we first bought our first home, you had credit standards that mortgages and quote unquote 28% of your income. And your total savings was 35%. Total management was 35% in cars and other ancillary loans. And my first assignment when I went over to the financial services industry was to go out to spend a week out in the Denver zone and kind of learn how the financial service industry works. And I was going out to a dinner with zone manager at the time, and so I was back in the office. And I sat down with the credit line at the time, and she was going over how you read these TransUnion credit reports and stuff. And I looked at her and I said, wow. And she would tell me how this person had 70% debt management. And she would say that how they were kiting the credit cards, using this credit card to pay this credit card, then going back to that credit card to pay this credit card.
Like a
And the
pyramid scheme.
0% that Bill
However,
was talking about.
they always made a car payment because I knew they needed transportation. So I said, well, and I shared my story about when we bought the house. And she says, well, that's okay. We just sold another car today. And the people that are financing cars will pay for that person that they default on the loan. So us as consumers, if we're legitimate loan buyers of that car, of transportation, of paying, there's in that pricing factor, knowing that loans will default. And part of that pricing factor. And the other thing that I meant to mention is the use of credit. Was anybody take advantage of those, buy something and pay a year, no financing charges for a year? Take advantage of that.
Yeah.
How many think actually fulfill that? What percentage actually fulfill those obligations?
Without paying the interest, you mean?
I can only speak for me.
Yeah, I can only speak for me.
Yeah, you're close. 10%, 15%.
Are all the.
Get by without paying a dime. Wow.
We did good. Then don't pay it off.
It's one
That's what they offer us.
interest that you didn't pay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you really have to read the fine print.
We just bought mattresses from Macy's last year and took advantage of that program. But if we didn't pay that bill off when it was due, that interest goes back to day one.
Yeah. It's a trap they hope you will.
That's why it's a good trap because 85% don't. That was back in the financial piece and Dave Ramsey quoted that statistic.
You have 12 to 36 opportunities for failure. Maybe 60, I guess, if it's 5.
So let's move on. We had then, of course, 9/11. And most certainly there will always be something, we have the political elections. And we had COVID coming into play. And now we've got the Ukraine situation. We saw a couple of years after the election that January 6th attack on the Capitol. So there's always going to be something to interrupt our flow and put uncertainty in our ability to manage our treasuries.
As we said a couple of weeks ago when Randy was here, the stock market's pretty fickle. The weird things that happen, things fall faster than they climb up, right?
Yeah.
And you see these declines, but it's really not anything to be concerned about, because especially if you're doing dollar cost averaging. When it falls, you're buying more shares at a lower price if you put the same amount. Dollar cost averaging is the single best guard against you're buying high and selling low. It really does.
Retired, that's my dollar. You don't have, I just got my last statement and I'm down $5,000 in 1 month.
And
I thought it was starting to go up again.
It'll be a rough year. I promise you, it's going to do this all year long. One of the things I've talked with Randy about is, I'm 66. Can I live to be 100? Maybe. This wonderful woman from church, she's turning 98 this week, and I hope I'm out. Now I'll tell you, last Saturday after I got done with mine, I went to her house and she was shoveling the snow in her driveway. I said, Betty, come on, man, let me. Oh, this is why I can do this. I said, well, I can't argue with that. You've been doing it for 98 years. If you die of a heart attack today, well, you made it to 98 years. But I hope I'm getting yelled at 32 years from now for shoveling snow.
That they now figured women were living to 100. So, and I was using a totally different kind of calculation and figuring out where I could afford to move. So now he says, okay, if you have $100,000, figure you need that for 20 years. That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
And so, to me, that was a much easier calculation than figuring out rental and this and that and all that other stuff, because that breaks it down. My family, my grandmother was 104.
Wow.
We got some good longevity.
So the men not so good.
So what I'm doing with Randy and investments, I'm continuing buying every 10% every month. I told Randy, I said, I don't know that I want to lower my risk level. Maybe I'll only live to 82 in my life expectancy, but if I live to 98 or 104, which is completely possible, I don't want to outlive my money, and I don't want my kids burdened by the fact that I didn't plan them. I don't want them to ever spend a dime on me. Right, Derek? You don't want to spend a dime on me.
You right here in the video clip.
So, and I'm glad I've had Randy to bounce ideas off of, because, he says, yep, you can do that. And showed me the track, and I won't run out of money if I can keep doing this. And it's the same idea. The dollar cost averaging will allow me to buy more when stock prices are down, and I'll be buying less when they're up. But if you look at the 100+ year history, it gradually goes up. So as the shares I bought at a low price, as that price goes up, they gain more. Even the ones that I bought at a high price will gain a little bit, but overall, I'm going to be well ahead.
And I think that's one important takeaway from Randy's presentation when you talk about tax advantage strategies. About 7-8 years ago, I started utilizing that after I retired. Is that I had a mutual fund that I've invested in all these years, and my cost basis is less than 20 cents on the dollar. So I can donate that to the church and eliminate that capital gains, and I can still invest in a like asset. It's conservative mutual fund. I can buy, instead of Fidelity, I can go out and buy JP Morgan or T. Rowe Price, and lower my cost basis as we move forward. And
let me just jump off that a little bit, because Shirley and I talked a little bit this week. one thing to keep in mind, because we talked in terms of taking your RMDs and donating it directly to the church to reduce your income, which has Social Security benefits. But keep in mind, those are from 401ks. You can't do it from they're from IRAs. You can't do them from a 401k or a 403b or a 457 plan. So it has to be in like a self-directed IRA, and it can be either Roth or regular. But the difference being, if it's a Roth, you don't pay taxes on that, but it is income. So as Social Security looks at that, it'll look at income, and you could end up paying more on that. All of that is going to be.
So if you did have like a 403B, which I do, because I work for nonprofit.
You have to roll.
You'd have to roll it over.
Also, they did an IRA and then
Yeah.
pay something like, from a stewardship standpoint, money to the church or other missions and ministries that I support from the IRA.
And that way you lower your what looks like income,
Right.
which Social Security looks at, decide if you're going to pay the extra.
Right.
Because there's a certain amount you pay. It was $168 this year, and depending on your income level, it could be another $68, or it could be another $168.
You mean Medicare, right, Bill?
Medicare B and D,
Yeah.
right? Depending on your income level. So if you can take that RMD out of a self-directed IRA, you lower your income and maybe save on Social Security, depending on.
Required minimum distribution. You're not old enough.
Yeah.
Required minimum distribution.
That.
The right acronym, okay.
Yeah.
I still got a couple years before I can take advantage of that.
Because Shirley and I talked about it this weekend and said, well, let's bring that up, and we'll make sure we clarify that.
That's a good point.
The other thing that helps is if you can, if you have multiple 401k, I should say RAs, sometimes it helps to put them into one to lower your expenses. Because if you're in lower amounts and a bunch of them, sometimes your expenses, because you're not at levels that give you a lower expense level, you pay more. And you're having to take a little bit out of this, and you get 10 checks in every month instead of one check.
Yeah.
So take a look at that with your investment counselor, your investment advisor, because sometimes it behooves you to put it all in one and lower your expenses.
Michael, I have a question
Okay.
on your last comment about capital gains donating to charity. And you can exclude that amount of the capital gain.
Yes, you limit.
But it was a mutual fund that you
Right. You
did
can do
that
it
with.
equities.
But what about property that you own and you have a capital gain? I bet you can't do that.
If the charity will accept it, that's the tricky part. That one I'm not as versed, obviously, but I have read that, is the charity going to accept it? Do they have restrictions on what they can accept? Because our experience with DBU, some of the churches have reversionary clauses, and we get property if the church closes, but we don't really want to be a landlord.
Okay, so what you were saying is you gave the mutual fund stock
Yes,
itself to the charity.
right. Now, there are other tools that might be a little bit easier to work with. All the brokerage account, Fidelity has what they call Fidelity Charity. And there's these donor advised funds from other brokerage firms. And it's more efficient because all you have to do is left pocket the right pocket and not get your church involved with the tax reporting that is required. Because we work with volunteers and they might be not CPAs and not know exactly what tax reporting is required.
There'd be some research. We'd likely have to get an accountant involved and pay them to help us with that. Not that we wouldn't do that, but if that situation arrived.
And it's pretty simple, but it's, working with volunteers, they might not know the idiosyncrasies that need to be fulfilled for your tax reporting purposes.
Things have gotten so complicated.
Yes, they have.
Mike, in that aspect, there's a guy in Redford. He was actually deputy supervisor for a while, and he's been in real estate, I think, his whole life. His name is Bob Miller, and he has a nonprofit called Red, Real Estate Investment Development or something. But when I worked at Redford Interfaith Relief, I worked with them, and what they do is they take donated property, like you would donate property, and they would take it on, and then the whole goal is to take the donated property and then have the money go to the charity of your choice.
So
So,
they would have to sell it.
hmm?
They would have to sell
Yeah, that's
They would
what,
sell
yeah,
and
yeah,
take care
that's
of all
what,
the
that's
paperwork.
what he does. And he's even done property like, you know, in different states and stuff. And I thought,
And there's other organizations like, was that donate cars to charity and stuff.
Yeah,
and then they sell it.
I would say if you're gonna get involved in something like that with your church, talk with your treasurer
Yes.
before you make the transaction, because as you do that, then the date that happened becomes key.
Yes.
And there's certain things that have to happen. So you want to make sure that everybody's aligned and knows what to do if you go
Mhm.
down that route.
yeah, they saw the need of people wanting to donate stuff. And,
Yeah.
yeah.
You don't want
that
your
was
church actually to become a bottleneck for you also
Right.
doing your own taxes. Because it could happen if you just go down that road.
Right.
Personally, I recommend if you do have a brokerage account, check with your brokerage account. I'm sure they've got that kind of, I know Merrill Lynch
Yeah.
has that. But have some kind of like Fidelity charitable, and it's much simpler because you can put that pool of money in, and if you've got another charity you might want to donate. Fidelity's got just a $50 minimum to send a grant out to somebody.
But again, with your stewardship, look at where they're sending that money. I know one of the things that Kim and I have supported since we lived in New Jersey is a thing called Aslan Youth Ministries. I used to tutor some underprivileged kids, math and English. And that charity still exists today. We still send money every year to them. I'm still in touch with Craig. And I like it because of what they've done. Some of their kids that have come through that program that lived in horrendous situations as kids, they've become counselors. They've got a mission in Haiti themselves. These kids that came through a rough life are now counseling other kids and going to Haiti with the mission they have there. I love giving to that charity because I see the results that are going on with real lives, kids that I've touched with that are now in their 30s and 40s. And, you know, they became, I forget what number, the 586th point of light in George Bush's 1,000 points of light. And Craig got to go down to DC for the award on it. But Craig is still in charge there. And when I go back to New Jersey, I like to see Craig and Leanne because they're still running that charity in the Jersey Shore area. But be involved. Same with your church. When you give money to that church, you should have a voice. Let that church, you have a discerning voice. Look at your talents. Look at your collective talents, everybody that's in the church. How can you collectively become better and more effective as a church? And you're a voting member. Be involved. Don't just give money and walk away from it. I think it's very important to be involved with your talents and as well as your money and your time.
To that point, Bill, the one thing I do like with our church is that we've always had the 10% given to missions. And at our annual meeting, we all can look at that grid sheet and we know what is going, and we know what missions we can challenge if there's a mission. And like Terry and I like giving to the church because we know to give it, there's so many, especially around Thanksgiving, our mailbox is full of everybody from Meals on Wheels to, you could give to 100 different places. But what I do like when we give to the church is we know that by giving to the church, we are also supporting these ministries that we've developed a relationship with. But like you said, there's so many, like back to our first class we had, there's scams out there asking for your charitable dollars too. So to be,
And they might give money to some people, but it's 5%.
exactly.
Right. And 95% is going to the people that administer.
So, I work hard for your money and wanted to go where you want to be able to partner with groups and give them, like you said, help support them, but you want to be one that is gonna.
And what I liked about Pastor Evans, Pastor Evans married Kim and I, but he said as long as he was pastor, the youth would always have a mission.
Yeah.
And
changing experience.
Yeah.
That was great.
And I think that's important for the youth, right? They go away, whether it be to Pennsylvania, just a few hours away, or down to Haiti or somewhere else. But they go away. They get away from their families, and they spend time, and they see man, I got it okay. And Mike's probably going to share the, story of his son because he shared it with me last week. But, when those kids come back and go to school, what did you do this summer? And they did
Went to
something quite a
Appalachia.
bit different
Yeah.
than what most of their peers do that catches people's attention. But your son went, Aaron, right?
Yes, son Aaron, at the time, most of us know that, we were involved with Youth Leader Corps. All the churches would identify, youth, be part of this program. And they went to Camp Royale. There's about 40 or 50 at the time. And he was kind of interested in a girl at that time from Alpha Baptist Church. Well, he was going between the two youth events or youth groups. And he said, he told the youth minister at Alpha that, well, I'm going on our youth trip here, and I don't think my parents will let me go, because we're going to spend the money and stuff like that. And so the youth minister called us, and fast forward, part of working at Chrysler, they had a very attractive company car program. And he used to complain that his older brother Jeff, got to drive the Intrepid, and he was relegated to the Mini. And he used to complain on that. He was always, he wanted that Intrepid. So anyway, they went down to Mexico, and their job was to build houses, and they were 8x8 boxes, and no bedrooms, just partitioned with curtains. And he come home. He says, Dad, Mom and Dad, I'm never going to complain about driving that minivan. How blessed he was to know what we get. Experiences here. And I can share all the stories. Bill articulated one pastor that we had was, as long as he was going to be here, mission trips. And we even had one person that was involved. She took the initiative. Well, why do I go to Tennessee when there's need here in the metropolitan Detroit area? We have a mission trip down here and coordinated one down. So,
Well, and I just have to insert real quick. My daughter, when she was at Michigan State, her spring break trips were hurricane relief trips, and another one that went to a church to help them in New York City. And she actually met her husband on those trips. So.
Yeah.
I think it's important to get involved in local ministry because you can do that every day, right? That can be a continuing program. But when you go away for a week with some of your peers and colleagues, there's a bond and a friendship that happens. Two of my best friends in the whole world are Steve Lipple and Dan Rames. And we first went to Haiti together when I was 14 and they were 15. I've been in scouts with Dan and Steve since we were like 10 and a half, 11 years old. As life would happen, we haven't done a lot together over these years because you get busy with kids. But when we get together, it's like time didn't change.
Oh, yeah.
It's like it's like nothing changed. It's like they're still my best friends.
Yeah, as someone who is an adult counselor, I can attest to that. When you drive with a bunch of kids in a van for 8 hours, you get to know each other real well. But also to your point of the local ministry and time count and treasure and what we're teaching. I remember we housed the homeless, and I think it was your son Sue who came home because we had kids come in and help with them. And it changed their view of really what homeless was. These were people because of circumstances. They all had jobs. We had to make lunch for them. One guy was going to school, but because of circumstances, he lost his apartment. We had and it was just a good exposure and a good chat to put things in perspective. Exactly what you're saying.
I think it's tougher when you fall on hard times in the United States because we're a wealthy country.
Yes.
I've been in the Honduras and I've seen the wealthy and the poor.
Yeah.
But it's kind of common to be poor because 80 to 90% of them are poor. So if you don't have anything, you're kind of like everybody else. If you're poor here, you're not like everybody else. Even the middle class is pretty wealthy.
And
so it's a tough road.
The hardest people to help in the 22 years I ran the food pantry, the hardest people to help were people like us that had done everything right. you
It
know,
just
and
hard times.
then when you were in your fifties and people started losing their houses, they went through their unemployment, they went through the savings, they were the same people that were helping with their kids, and they were the ones losing their houses. And there was one couple at our church, nobody knew how bad the situation was, and they were helping two of their grown kids. And they lost their house and lost their business and stuff. And they volunteered at the food pantry with me before, so they were very aware, but it's embarrassing to ask for help. And those were the people that were actually losing their houses, the people that had always been the donors before. And it was really hard to see that.
Goes to your point, Mike,
You know.
that there's a fine line that we all walk. Never for the
Yes.
great for dad go all of us, you know, we'll never take it for granted.
Well, and last week, just a sidebar, Randy mentioned about this, we're always looking for the thing to get rich with.
The silver bullet.
Yeah.
Silver bullet. Like,
Yeah.
and he mentioned about this Bitcoin. Home. And, how many people got caught up in those Bitcoin report? And then just yesterday, I was reading the paper, this cartoon Blondie, I don't know if anybody ever Blondie. And he talks about, a lot of friends are buying into Bitcoin. What does that even mean, Alex? It's spending a bunch of money on things that don't exist, but have value because someone says they exist. I thought that was so interesting on the story of this Bitcoin. And his son asked his dad, would you ever buy something like that crazy dad? He said, and Vladdy comes back and says, no, I got this. And so he was attuned. So, you know, let's start bringing this together. And the scripture tells us that we're going to have some challenges in life. About uncertainty in our economy. We're going to have those bumpy roads. Well, certainly in Michigan, we know we've got potholes, and I don't know, sometimes you just can't avoid them. And in people's circumstances, Sue is shared, or we probably know a colleague that was laid off or something to that effect. But Christ knew that money was going to be a challenge. He spoke more as I studied financial literacy over this past decade and so, speaks more about money than he does on any other subject. So he knew that going forward, people were going to face financial challenges. And, you know, Paul passed on to Timothy in 1 Timothy 6:17. And I used that as part of my devotion. We had it here when Jeff from Cousins Lasky was here. It says, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, which richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment.
I think the thing to keep in mind too is, like you said, Christ probably spoke more about money than any other subject. But you know, there's nothing wrong with being rich. It's, you know, God had plenty of rich people in the Bible. And it's the love of money that becomes a problem, right? When that becomes your God. And there's an Eagles song that I love, Take It to the Limit. It says, you can spend all your time making money. You can spend all your love making time. And I'm a mathematician, so the transitive property to that is spend all your love making money. That's a dangerous place to be because you're only one event away from being poor. And so, as God says, put your faith in Him, and then He will guide you on where to put your money. I'm actually encouraged when I see guys like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett spending money because they've got the resources to open manufacturing plants for drugs that are needed in Africa, because that company is not going to do it on their own because it's not profitable. Right. But if a Bill Gates comes in and puts that much money in that plant, oh, we'll stay open for that. We can make money now. And, you know, I'm glad that the Warren Buffetts and the Bill Gates are encouraging other billionaires to say, hey, share some of that wealth you have, because there's some things we can do really good in this world.
It's a great resource. Yeah, it's a great resource and it can be a tipping point. You know.
So if you have great wealth, with that comes great responsibility, and God expects that of you.
All right, so what should you do? Well, there are a lot of people willing to give advice. I put some just resources out there that I've studied over the years, just for you to kind of glance at. The one that I circled in is this Ron Blue. Fortunately, learned from Focus on the Family. And that was kind of a turning point for Deb and I in our lives, along with some godly people that in the day that had stewardship Sundays in the fall as we prepared. And so I'll share the experiences we're going through. But so a lot of people are willing to give good advice. Some of it is probably you take with a grain of salt. Like I said, we use Dave Ramsey's book, which Christine Vance. I've heard her speak several times here in the metropolitan Detroit area. But we've recognized some of the names. But, all right, so you got some people that are willing to give advice, but where do we find timeless wisdom? And we can look no further than the Bible. Always right, relevant, and unchanged. And I used to tell our pastor when we were starting one of his classes that I wish I was as smart as, these individuals that wrote all these nice books, are getting royalties and all that, because all they've done is plagiarize them. Let's cut to the chase. They just plagiarize the Bible. And so let's go through some of these concepts that they teach to be effective stewards of our resources, and look at what the Bible has to say. So I've kind of defined biblical financial stewardship as could be defined as the use of God-given resources for the accomplishments of God-given goals or objectives. So that's, I think, what our purpose is to live a godly life, to model Christ's example and teachings. The Bible is a guidebook for our lives, and we sure want to be able to model his teachings and live as he would have taught us. Well, Scripture has a tendency to say about money and or material possessions. That's where I thought I was going to say spoke more about it. Money is an extremely important issue because it influences our relationship with God. And there's so many parables that speak about money, about being that tight-fisted person, or generosity, being a cheerful giver. And we got to remember that God owns it all, and all we're here is to manage that resources that we've been blessed with. We are certainly in the United States, as Bill alluded to, very blessed with the wealth and the ability to acquire financial needs.
It's interesting too, because there's been psychological studies, and I think one of them was out of the University of Michigan. Don't quote me on that. But giving people, the mental health instances that happen with people that are giving is starkly below anybody that is not a giving person. And it's interesting that psychological studies back that up. If you're a giving person, you're more likely to have a very healthy mental health attitude towards life. Because if you're always worried about money, that's a stress that God says, let me take that off you. Don't worry about the manna for tomorrow, right? That's what he told the people as they wandered the desert. I will provide for you. But they always wanted if they stored that stuff up, it was no good the next day.
It was really interesting all the years I worked with food pantry, and we did scouting for food. And in Redford, I was one of the ones that actually got to see collecting it with the scouts, and then the whole course of where it went. And the people that had the least gave the most.
And you know that story from the Bible.
And I mean, it was just amazing. No one.
The widow that gave the.
Yeah, the widow's mite. No one no one put out 1 or 2 cans of food. It was never hanging on the door. It was always sitting on the porch or whatever. And we used to knock on doors. And then when we found out when things got so tight, you know, you had a widow that could barely afford to give you 1 can of food. So we stopped knocking on doors for that very reason, because so many people were in dire straits. And we saw that with the free lunch program with the kids, how much the economy, you know, went down and everything. And it was just amazing to see that people that didn't want to come to the pantry because somebody always had it worse than them. And like the ones that were losing their houses and stuff. And I mean, it really, and yet people that knew what it was like to not have were the first to give.
You were saying psychologically too, though, psychologists will tell you, they'll have people in their office, they work for 2 school psychologists, and money is so emotionally charged. He said people will tell you the worst, horrible, traumatic things from their childhood. They won't share with their salary. I mean, money is very emotionally charged. And it's, to Bill's point, God doesn't intend for us to be stressed. He provides for us like the sparrows, but we do want, it's a funny phenomenon.
So let's look at some of these biblical financial principles. Psalms 24:1. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, all those who live in it. So being repetitive, God owns it all. We're here to manage that resources. She started in the beginning. We have our time, talent, and treasures, and He's asked us to manage it. Proverbs. The wise store up choice food and olive oil, and fools gulp theirs down. And again from Proverbs. Shared this verse earlier as part of the devotion, whether the ant is sluggish. Consider it ways to be wise. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler, yet it stores its provision in summer and gathers its food in harvest. The biblical principle. And if you've been fortunate or read any of these books on personal financial, whether it be Master Your Money or Dave Ramsey, this following kind of outline this at Dave Ramsey presentation is you've got to learn to save money. We talked about that emergency fund. And then again, as the devotion, you move that to your 3 months of living expenses, then 6 months, because you never know the uncertainty in the economy, if you're going to lose your job. And of course, you know, I can attest to that. Automobile industry is a roller coaster.
Mm-hmm.
Every year it was like almost 90% of the years, every fall, it was like, okay, we're going to cut jobs. And you've seen that in the newspapers today. You need to learn to save money. Timothy and Luke. We brought nothing into this world, and we can take nothing out of it. So if we have food and clothing, we will be content. Then he said to them, watch out, be on your guard, all kinds of greed. Life is not consistent on abundance of possessions. Again, the concept of our culture says that we need things and we have to go out and get things. But the concept here is spend less than you earn. And I'm going to get more into that concept towards the end of the presentation. So spend less than you earn. And then the rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is a slave to the lender. So what we talked about earlier? Talked about that precipitous increase in credit card debt, and how people are dependent on it. But there is a responsible way of using debt responsibly. You know, it's very difficult for a young couple just newly married to go out and spend $100, and I think it's probably about average now, between $200,000 and $300,000 for a house if they're just graduating from college and starting their first job. So a mortgage is responsible. But I would counsel you to go back to the concept that was in place I guess I got back up now at my age, but 50 or so years ago, when you looked at a responsible percentage and not just, well, okay, 50% of my income is going to go towards, this mortgage fund. So it's unfortunate that the standards have been relaxed so much. And again, working in the industry, you and I are paying for those penalties that the companies make. So crazy.
So many people losing houses with the 80-20 rule.
Yeah.
We could only afford 80% of the mortgage, but it's okay. We'll give you another 20% loan over here. So you have two different,
No equity.
and it's like, why could they think that was a good thing? I mean, people thought, oh, great, now I can get this other loan so I can buy this house that I can't afford. I'm like, why is that a good thing?
And what they're doing this year now, what they're implementing, I'm not sure what the date is, but if you have a lower credit score, you can get a better mortgage rate.
Oh, really?
I'm sorry.
If you have a 780 interest rate, the government is saying, well, that's unfair because you've got a good credit rating. So you're going to get a higher interest rate than the person that has 640 that is being implemented.
So
and that's just negative connotation for those that are responsible.
Right.
yeah,
And follow sensible stewardship, so to speak. And we're getting penalized.
But I mean, so somebody that can have a 15% debt to income ratio now could go out and buy a house and get a better mortgage rate, and it's gonna, that they're not gonna be responsible for it, and it's gonna.
And that used to be contrary because you were rewarded with a good credit score.
right. Well, it was the same thing with debt. Oh, let's get up to $10,000 in debt so you can get forgiven for your credit card. I'm like, why is this a good thing? Teaching? And I mean, that's what we saw. People that would get a job and work, but they didn't make enough to really make ends meet, then got zero help. And they were the ones, the working poor were always the ones that
At the same
were the
time,
biggest problem.
crazy policies like that shouldn't change the way you approach your life.
Right.
I have a saying that I always used to use. I used to say it when companies bought other companies. I say, first lead rule of corporate life is the collective stupidity of an organization is directly proportional to its size. As it gets bigger, it usually gets stupider. Sometimes that's true of the government too. It shouldn't change what you do. You have to manage your own life, your own finances, and do that in tune with God and in prayer with God.
Right.
Okay, let's continue on. What's another principle that we need to glean for a personal financial strategy? Comes from Luke. Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Well, you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it. Or if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying this person began to build and wasn't able to finish. Okay, so what's the principle here? Develop a spending plan or a budget. And again, these biblical principles are weaved throughout all those resources that are sitting on that table. And, my whole career in the controller's office was budgeting and forecasting. Things change. But when we went through, the nice thing about financial peace was the discipline. There was a 13-week course at the time, and you went through 3 budget cycles with the participants. And, when we sat down, I shared the example that, okay, you go to Christian bookstore was still open. And you go there without a spending plan. What is the first thing you do? You spend more than you really want. You go in to buy this one particular resource, and you come out with $30, $40.
Let's see, $80 local bread.
So, when you have a budget, it kind of controls your environment and puts parameters around it. Now, it's gonna take several iterations to get it quote unquote right. But I think that's one of the big takeaways I had with one of our godly members of the church that when we were newly married, is that he talked about, brought out his checkbook. And he said, you know, first check is I'll pay myself. Make sure I got some pocket change for the month. The next check is to the church. The next check for utility bills. The next check, see the plug. And I meant to pull this out as I was driving. I should have pulled it out. But I learned Excel. I started in the days when we didn't have Excel. It was 13 column grade sheets. And the story is when I retired, the people couldn't believe I used to do forecasts for the business plan for American Motors without an Excel spreadsheet. It was a calculator and a pencil and an eraser. But I learned Excel by putting our checkbook on. And if you go back to 1987, my checkbook looks the same now. It's web page, but it's the same order as it was 40 years ago. Pay myself, you know, a check. Now, we were personally fortunate that we only got paid once a month. Probably. And that helped the process, but it still can apply the same principle. You know, discipline, and that became inherently our budget. But when you did another, you know, a true budget, found that you were spending less. And when we go visit our son and who's an officer in the Coast Guard, and they still followed the Dave Ramsey plan, and they got their envelopes for their entertainment expense. And they just use credit cards very sparingly, but they do use it, but then again, they pay them off. So they control their entertainment expenses, and you know, they were saving. They just went to took the girls to the Poconos to one of the water parks, very worthwhile. And they said that, you know, it was all paid for.
So you ready to ride wolves?
So
I want to be on the back of that wolf.
Yeah.
There.
Long story, we were supposed to go with them, but then they asked us to change our plans because they had something better for us to do. So we'll be going out there in the first part of May. So let's continue with what how we should have some personal financial strategies coming from Timothy again. Anyone who does not provide for their relatives, especially their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than the unbeliever. But godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into the world and we take nothing out of it. But if we have food, clothing, we will be content with that.
Have you really thought about that first? I think that first verse there, 1 Timothy 5:8 is really important. Because sometimes you hear of people that give all their money to a charity and a family is gone wanting and they go on social programs. That means everybody else is paying for the rest of their family. So it is our responsibility to care for our family and not put the burden on others. So that, to me, that rings very true.
And the bottom line, Bill, to your point, it allows us to prioritize where our values are. You know, are we going to go out? I mean, remember the days of when the iPhones first came out. Everybody had to run to the store and you saw the big line down the mall just to get that new tool. And, you know, a year ago, they spent $700 on iPhone 1, and now iPhone 2 is out. They're going to go out and spend another $700.
Yeah.
And I remember my iPad that I had for 12 years. How many generations it went? And finally, I said, yep, I'm going to replace it because I'm losing the Bible. And that's what I use.
You can't run anymore on that old.
No, it doesn't support it.
Yeah.
And I lost many apps, but once that hit that one, I said, okay, that's it.
We talk about prioritizing your spending. I always think of cars because I worked in an environment where everybody, a lot of them had leased cars. Everybody had a new car every 3 years. And I think I wrote all my cars till they went belly up. But as long as they were, I buy them, pay for them for 3 years, and then didn't have a car payment for the next 7 or 8.
Don't talk to me because I do things.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying.
But you're in a different.
I'm just saying, in my prioritized spending,
No, that's.
I was paying for school, I was paying for college, and car was quote unquote just transportation. So as long as I had a car that ran, I didn't care if it was the latest model. I just cared that it ran and that I didn't have a car payment, but I kept paying my car payment to my savings account.
I was just sharing with Jeff, he brought the subject up. My lease came up and I was gonna buy it. Because these cars worth more.
Yeah.
But I went to the dealership and I was talking about the options. And I said, I'm most likely gonna buy this car. What's the, process? And he said, well, let me just quote your price. I said, fair enough. And so he quoted me a price. Well, the sales manager finally came over and he says, this is what I'm doing. He's taking the difference between the residual value and the market value of the used car. And not quite splitting the difference, but by the time you'd have to pay sales tax, he was splitting the difference. And it turns out that automobile industry started opening up their purse strings, so you got incentives. So,
They want used cars were gold.
Yeah.
so my payment is actually going down.
Now, my son-in-law is not expected to release.
Reasons.
That's what we did. That's part of it was because I'm the one driving the car and we didn't know how much longer I would have to drive. So we decided to do another year lease and see where we are. Oh, then you check.
And so this.
That day, so.
Family. They hope to get a car.
But we got
Sorry, Mike.
This conversation has been excellent, the sharing of our experiences and, as I said earlier, the demographics, and knowing a lot of you sitting around the room personally know that you follow these principles as we've gone through, and that's why I said we want to share with our children or grandchildren to leave a legacy not of financial means, but of wisdom.
It was neat to see Dad just buy another vehicle after he had my brother's baby. So he was attached to it. And it was like, I'm like, Dad, you need to buy a newer truck. Dad's getting tired of fixing your car and everything. And he's like, I'm going to be retiring in a couple of years. And he's like, Mom, I'm paying cash for the car. I am not buying anything that I have to have a car payment. And so all that Dave Ramsey stuff that.
So the wants versus needs work with them.
Yep.
All right, continuing on, 2 Corinthians and 1 Timothy gives us some more wisdom. From 2 Corinthians, each of you should give what you have decided in your heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves cheerful giving. And in 1 Timothy, command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. So at the end of the day, giving is our goal. And of course, the biblical principle is tithing, is 10%. That's not getting the debate whether it's gross or net. Let's just look at giving as our goal and be a cheerful giving about it and follow the mandate. And I think that one of the things that we had, Dr. Gordon Schrader was the pastor when I was growing up. And again, we used to have Stewardship Sundays and stewardship programs. And one of the charts that we had was so powerful was a strive to start where you're at, but focus on getting to the goal and using those strategies. And of course, we had some, Sunday school and was talking about these biblical principles. and looking at just common sense of how you get there when you get a raise. And I've counseled all our employees that when they get a raise, make sure you're putting all that money, because that allowed me to retire, was to take advantage of saving and putting your 401k and taking advantage of those principles to prepare for the futures. Because as I said, if you look at the number of people, we don't walk in a financial situation, we don't walk in their shoes, but I'm looking at the people and you know what kind of job they have, that they haven't saved a dime in 401k. It's kind of
Yeah, and I think the idea of a strider that Dr. Schrader had when we were growing up is key, because you got to take a look at your financial situation. As we discussed earlier, you are responsible for that. You can't force your family to take on social programs so I can get 10% here. So what can I get to? What do I need to do to get to that 10%? Where 10% for God, 10% for myself in the future, and 80% to cover. So as you look at your steps to get there, that becomes really, really important. And every journey begins with a single step. So what can I do here? Maybe it's only $1 or $10, whatever allows you to get there is key.
Bill, I think it's really important when we talk about strivers. We saw a family, and I'll never forget, and they were very involved in their church. As a matter of fact, they even went to, on to earn they were real close to being pastors. They went to Bible school and everything, and actually met each other and got married. And their church was so on them when one of them lost their job, that you have to give that 10%. And for you to say, you don't want to have to go on social services. So they were putting it on their credit card. And the pastor was making them feel guilty because they were in leadership and they were supposed to set the example. And it's like, there's a time, and I'm like, I couldn't believe that concept that how can you put people down because they've come on hard financial times. They were two of the most faithful people I knew with their faith. And
that's why I like that idea
awful.
of strider, combining striving and tithing. How do I get there, right? And circumstances do happen,
and there's a time for everything, and you can catch up later if you're really in dire straits.
Passage in Ecclesiastes, go back about time.
Yep.
Time for everything.
Right. Yeah.
All right, so giving is the goal, but so we'll summarize what we've learned. And again, if you pick up one of these books, you're going to find certainly if you're formulated this presentation through financial peace. But God owns it all. We need to learn to save, spend less, use debt responsibly. So it's develop a budget so that we put parameters around our spending. We'll certainly prioritize. You need, when I retired from shared that, I worked for Mercedes-Benz Financial Services. Well, when I retired, they still had a employee purchase program. And honestly, I have to admit, it was nice when somebody was giving me a car. It was nice driving an E-Class. However, when I retired, somebody looked at me, one of the VPs come up to me and said, because one of the spoofs they did in my retirement was, at the time I was looking at Buick on. He said, well, why didn't you do it? You're not going to get a Mercedes. Unfortunately, I can get two Chevrolet. Turned out I ended up with Chevrolet Traverse, two Chevrolet Traverses for the price of this car. So I get 2 for 1. Yeah. He said, "See, you're smart." Knowing you, he said that you made a wise decision.
Yeah, we remember you, the Mercedes guy driving the Chevy. That's why you're teaching the class.
All right, so what is our next steps? Well, Ken, reflect on those biblical financial principles and it's us collectively around the class, look at an opportunity to perhaps mentor somebody and, get involved in sharing your knowledge about your own personal journey financial freedom. And then, how many each year go to the doctor to get that physical? We don't look forward to that. Most certainly I don't. And probing and throbbing, they breathe deep, take deep breaths and all that good stuff and all that blood work. And keep looking at those nurses and I said, you have a sharp needle? And she says, well, for you, I'm going to go out and find a rusty. But anyway, kidding aside, you get all that and they go through all the blood results and they tell you the same thing. Watch what you eat. How's your exercise program? Well, could be better. Well, let's see if you can be more disciplined. Same way with your own personal situation. Take a financial situation. What are your are you where you feel your allocation of your assets are to that? What can I do if I do have debt to bring that better under control and put into a place to do that? And of course, look at your own personal situation. Are you being true to God's wisdom? Effectively using your time and talent and treasure. And most certainly, being retired, as I really enjoyed being retired, share I have this New Version Bible app, and really think that's just wonderful. And our younger people introduced me to that about 7-8 years ago. It's just a wonderful experience. So study God's Word. There's a lot of resources out there that you can go into. One of the books, Ron Blue's book from the 2008, Surviving the Financial Meltdown. A lot of Matt Hill shared how to develop this. So study God's Word. And as I shared earlier, that I have this addiction to gambling on Michigan football games. My good friend, I don't know if you have heard of Dr. Jim Kent, but he's most certainly very familiar with our folks here at Redford's Crosspoint.
And he'll be here on the 1st of April, and it'll be fun. It'll be fun.
It'll be fun, yeah.
So traveling to football games and using our gambling that who's going to buy dinner after the game.
It's a big gambling problem.
And then after we got married, it was dinner at Topinka's.
Oh, Topinka's. Wow, that takes us back
to the season.
Wow.
But we came up with this together. I ended up coming with that, but now he wants to take credit. One called the 80-10-10 test. And take your income, save 10%, retire this 10%, and live on the other 80%. And that's been our motto, my wife and I, for the last 43, while we were striders to begin with. It didn't take us long to get this. The last 45 years of marriage has been our plan. There was one time I was had a credit card debt for about 2 months. So I'll bore you with another story. American Motors, back in the debacle and the recessions, instead of cutting people's pay, they said they were going to complete this plan where they would have a kind of a deferred savings and being responsible for budget planning, prepare the budget, and of course, we would have to pay it out based on a wheel tax to the employees. And so I kept saying, okay, you get me a meeting and say, well, how are you going to make the budget? I said, well, told the CFO that, well, we'll just not pay out the wheel tax. So that you can fight contract. And this went on for a couple of iterations, so meetings of how we're going to do it. And so over Thanksgiving holiday, I was ingrained that we're going to make this payment. Well, I could figure out what my payment was going to be. So we went and bought some piece of furniture. Then come back, all right, getting ready for the board meeting. Right, here's how we get together and here's how we're gonna do it. No, we're not gonna pay it out. I looked at the CFO and I said, John, you told me it's contract. He says, well, if they want jobs, contracts can be renegotiated. Oh, thank you, John. But anyway, it was fortunately, it was short term.
The thing I think about with this illustration too, Mike. I mean, it's financial discipline, but what I've always, since I was a young girl and first using this with, my parents teaching me to save and teaching me to give to the church. I always like to think of it as giving is a spiritual discipline. The same as reading the Bible is a spiritual discipline. Praying is a spiritual discipline. Giving is a spiritual discipline. And that kind of helps me in my relationship with God and with my relationship with money. Because like we said, it's emotionally charged. And if I look at it, it's a spirit. And so should never, ever, a lot of people say churches only want your money and this, and that. I thought, no, we've got it. Oh, wow. It's between you and God, not between you and the church. It's a spiritual discipline. And through that and studies and like this seminar, it does get you to the point where it's actually joyful to be able to, it puts you in a good relationship with God, I feel. That's my personal testimony.
I think we can all attest as we go through our lives. We don't know, pray and we look back and see how God has blessed us.
Provided. Oh, yeah.
And it's all
above and
putting your
beyond.
trust in God. I could spend another hours my career and decisions and wanted this job. Or I'll just share the quick example of the demerger of Chrysler and Daimler Chrysler.
That's right.
The separation of the Chrysler Financial. And at the time I was working for Andre Homestead in Germany, the CFO. And he calls me in. And everybody was finding out where they were landing, whether Chrysler or Mercedes. And it was kind of obvious for some if you were doing the forecast for Chrysler vehicles and Chrysler Business Center, then you were a Chrysler. If you're doing Mercedes Financial, well, I was working directly for him. So I didn't have an allegiance. And so he calls me in and he says, well, where do you want to go, Mike? And I said, well, Andre, I think I want to go, I want to stay with Christ, kind of that American in myself. And he says, I knew you would say that. He says, but there's no spot at Christ. He says, there's a spot for you at Mercedes Financial. So, okay.
So why did he ask you?
Yeah, exactly, right.
What did
So it's his opinion anyway, right?
Now you just.
He said, well, here's the job. I'm going to put you in charge of operating expenses. And of course, back in the days, Mercedes, just write a check for whatever you want. And as we got into it, we're spending, jokingly, $150 per employee on a Christmas party. So I'm approving all these POs now and responsible for the budget. Wow. But God was in control because 2008 came, and what did Obama say? Chrysler Financial is out of business. And Chrysler Financial was absorbed by Allen Financial. All my friends except for Ham were let go. I mean, they just chopped it down.
Isn't that funny? Hindsight's 20/20, but you look back and you're like, kind of like when Joseph in the Bible ends up, his brothers abandon him, but you look back later and you see how God was actually protecting him in God's wisdom and put him in a different spot. So yeah, I think we all have stories where God kind of,
stories.
what seemed terrible, you look back and you go, oh, that's what you were up to, God.
Yeah.
Great story, Mike.
But the thought I wanted to leave you with is the stewardship spark is ignited when you know and hold a trust that was never entirely ours, and that this trust will be passed down to others from the others. So it's the ability to leave a legacy, and we could spend a topic on that. about a legacy, and we'll get more into that at our next session. End of life strategies and talking about, what your legacy are and how to, promote that and have, those conversations with our family. Thank you very much.